Welcome to the Depth Dive. Today we're tackling a really interesting puzzle. Why some students seem to get in their own way, academically.
hmm
We're talking about academic self-handicapping, those situations where someone might procrastinate on a big project or just not really put in their best effort for a test. It's almost like setting up roadblocks to their own success.
It does sound a bit strange when you first hear about it. You'd think everyone wants to do well, right?
Right.
But as we explore the research, especially the comprehensive work of Tim Erdan and Carol Midgley, a fascinating picture starts to emerge. We'll be digging into their 2001 paper in Educational Psychology Review to really get into the skin of this idea.
Exactly. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding this fascinating area of educational psychology. We've sifted through the research, including Erdan and Midgley's insights, to bring you the key nuggets without overwhelming you. Our mission is to make this complex topic clear and engaging.
And it's something that resonates with a lot of people, I think. Haven't you ever noticed someone who appears to be, well, sabotaging their own progress and wondered what's really going on?
Totally.
This deep dive aims to give you a framework for understanding those seemingly self-defeating behaviors.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. What exactly is academic self-handicapping?
At its heart, it's about creating obstacles to success in situations that matter to you. The idea is that if you don't perform well, you can blame those obstacles instead of thinking it's down to, a lack of ability.
Give us some concrete examples from Erdan and Midgley's work. What does this look like in real life?
Well, their paper highlights things like deliberately putting off studying or not trying very hard when you should be focused, or even just generally messing around instead of working.
Mm-hmm.
It's about establishing a ready-made external excuse if things go south.
And the timing of this is key, isn't it? It's not just like making excuses afterwards.
Precisely. Self-handicapping happens either before you even start the task or while you're in the middle of it. You're setting the stage for a potential explanation before you even know the outcome.
The paper also talks about different kinds of self-handicapping, active versus less active. What's the distinction there?
Right. Active forms are the ones that are more intentional and behavioral procrastination, reduced effort, even things like substance use or getting swamped with other commitments.
And the less active forms.
Things like shyness or, having a bad mood have been mentioned. But Erdan and Midgley really focus on the active forms because they see self-handicapping as a largely deliberate strategy.
That makes sense. It feels more like a conscious choice if you're actively doing something or not doing something with a specific outcome in mind.
Exactly. And while it's related to how we explain our successes and failures, attributions, it's not the same as simply making an attribution after the fact. Self-handicapping is a preemptive move. It lays the groundwork for a potential excuse later on. Think about the difference between intentionally pulling an all-nighter before an exam versus just saying you were tired after you failed. The first is self-handicapping. The second is just an explanation.
So why go to all this trouble? What's the driving force behind intentionally making things tougher for yourself?
That's where we get into the fascinating question of motivation. Is it primarily about protecting your own self-esteem, or is it more about managing how others perceive you?
Okay.
Erdan and Midgley explore research suggesting it often serves both purposes.
Both. How does that work in practice?
Well, some research indicates that individuals who are concerned about their self-worth might intentionally reduce their effort, especially if they don't have another readily available excuse for potential failure.
Uh-huh.
There's also evidence that for students with lower self-esteem, having a pre-existing handicap can actually make them feel slightly better if they perform poorly.
So having that excuse in place sort of softens the blow to their own self-image.
That's the idea. However, Erdan and Midgley point out that the bulk of the evidence leans towards self-presentation being the stronger motivator.
Oh, interesting.
They note that people who self-handicaps often have lower overall self-esteem and even use self-deprecatory language about themselves, even when others accept their external excuses.
So even if they manage to convince others that their poor performance wasn't due to a lack of ability, they still don't feel great about themselves.
Yeah.
That's
So
interesting.
it seems so. And the really ironic thing is that while self-handicapping might help deflect blame for perceived lack of ability, it often leads to negative judgments from others about their work ethic and personal character.
Oh, right.
People might see them as lazy or unreliable, even if they don't think they're unintelligent.
It sounds like a strategy with a high risk of backfiring. Now, the paper also delves into whether self-handicapping is driven by a desire to approach something or avoid something. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this is the distinction between approach and avoidance motives.
Mm.
Is the primary goal to avoid looking incompetent? That's the avoidance motive?
No.
Or could it sometimes be about creating a situation where succeeding despite the odds makes you look even more talented, an approach motive?
So it's like thinking, wow, I aced that even though I barely studied, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Some researchers, like Tice in her 1991 work,
Hmm.
have proposed that individuals with high self-esteem might engage in self-handicapping for this esteem-boosting reason. They might feel confident enough to overcome the obstacle and want to further showcase their abilities.
That's an interesting angle, but what's Erdan and Midgley's perspective on this?
Well, while they acknowledge this viewpoint, they argue that the dominant perspective, and the one they support, is that self-handicapping is fundamentally an avoidance strategy. It stems from a fear of failure and the anxiety of appearing inadequate. They suggest that even when it seems like someone is trying to enhance their image by succeeding against the odds, the underlying driver is often a fear of not living up to their own high standards.
They bring up a study by Tyson Baumeister to support this, right? What did that study find?
Yes, Tyson Baumeister found that individuals with high self-esteem didn't self-handicap after receiving positive feedback on a previous task.
Okay.
However, they did self-handicap when they didn't receive any feedback. Tyson Baumeister interpreted this as high self-esteem individuals handicapping to create an opportunity to appear exceptionally capable.
But Erdan and Midgley see it differently.
They do. Their interpretation is that after the initial success, the fear of subsequent failure was reduced, thus removing the need to self-handicap.
Ah.
However, when the initial performance was unknown, even those with high self-esteem worried they might not perform as well as they hoped, and that anxiety triggered the self-handicapping behavior.
So even for those who appear very confident, the fear of not meeting their own expectations or the expectations others have of them could be the underlying cause. That's a key insight.
Precisely. They conclude that while there might be a temporary ego boost from succeeding despite handicaps, the primary reason people engage in self-handicapping in the first place is the fear of negative judgments about their abilities from others. It's more about avoiding looking bad than actively trying to look exceptionally good.
Okay, so we're getting a clearer picture of why this happens. Now, what are some of the other things that researchers have linked to self-handicapping? What are the typical correlates and consequences?
The research has uncovered several interesting connections. Emotionally, individuals who self-handicap tend to experience a smaller dip in self-esteem after a failure compared to those who don't.
Okay.
And if they happen to succeed despite the obstacles they've created, they might even get a bigger boost to their self-esteem. They also have a tendency to downplay their ability when they fail, but emphasize it when they succeed.
So it's a way of managing their emotional response to how they perform.
Exactly. Garcia's work from '95 suggests it can be seen as a strategy for regulating emotions around failure, leading to a less negative emotional impact. However, and this is really important, the actual performance outcomes are generally negative.
Ah.
People who self-handicap tend to perform worse than those who don't.
So that short-term emotional buffer comes at the expense of their long-term achievement.
Precisely. And it can easily turn into a negative spiral. Lower achievement can increase the need to self-handicap in the future.
Right.
It's also linked to other problematic behaviors like withdrawing from challenges, using negative coping mechanisms, and developing poorer study habits. The longitudinal study by Zuckerman and colleagues in 1998 really illustrated this, showing how self-handicapping predicted and was predicted by poorer overall adjustment over time.
That paints a pretty concerning picture. Are there specific personality traits that make someone more likely to engage in self-handicapping?
Yes, several have been identified. These include lower feelings of self-determination, a belief that ability is a fixed trait rather than something that can be developed.
Fixed mindset.
Exactly. Higher levels of self-consciousness and a strong preoccupation with whether their performance is attributed to their innate ability or their effort.
Okay.
They often want to be seen as natural talented, so putting in a lot of visible effort might suggest they aren't.
So they'd rather be perceived as lazy but potentially gifted than hardworking but perhaps less innately talented? Is that?
That's a simplified way of putting it, yeah. But it captures the core concern about how their inherent abilities are perceived by others.
Gotcha.
And as we've discussed, while the initial intention might be to protect themselves from negative ability judgments, it ultimately comes with significant social and performance costs.
Let's bring this back to the specific focus of Erdan and Midgley's work, academic self-handicapping in educational settings. Why is the school environment such a, well, fertile ground for this kind of behavior?
Schools are almost ideal settings for studying self-handicapping. Students are constantly being evaluated, their abilities are very publicly on display through grades and exams,
Right.
and these evaluations have tangible consequences for their future academic and career paths. Plus, the constant interaction with teachers and peers provides ample opportunities to manage how they are perceived.
It's a high-pressure environment where those perceptions really carry weight. The paper mentions some early limitations in research on academic self-handicapping with a focus on broader measures like procrastination. What was the problem with that approach?
Exactly. Earlier research often used general questionnaires that measured things like putting tasks off without specifically asking about the underlying self-protective reason for that procrastination.
Hmm.
Just because someone delays starting an assignment doesn't automatically mean they're doing it to create an excuse for poor performance.
So the why behind the behavior is really crucial.
Absolutely. The 1997 study by Feck and Rodwalt looked at claimed handicaps excuses students would offer before exams, such as not having slept well.
Uh-huh.
They found that these excuses did influence how students explained their subsequent performance, but it was difficult to determine if these were genuine handicaps or simply excuses offered in advance. Rodwalt and Hill found similar patterns, mainly among male students.
So just mentioning you didn't sleep well isn't the same as intentionally staying up all night to have a ready-made excuse.
Precisely. This is why the development of measures specifically designed to assess academic self-handicapping, like the scales created by Garcia in '95 and Murray and Warden in '92, was a significant step forward.
Okay.
Garcia's scale included behaviors like procrastinating in class, although it still didn't directly probe the self-protective motive. Murray and Warden's research indicated that students who self-handicapped tended to study for the same total number of hours, but spread those hours over fewer days, and they had a more negative view of their own performance.
And Erdan and Midgley revisit Zuckerman's longitudinal work in the context of educational settings. What did that reveal about college students?
It reinforced the idea of a detrimental cycle. Self-handicapping was linked to coping through withdrawal, increased negative self-focus, poorer academic achievement and study habits, and lower self-esteem over time.
Wow.
It really highlighted how this strategy can become deeply entrenched and have widespread negative effects in an academic context.
So the overarching understanding is that academic self-handicapping isn't just about being lazy or having poor time management skills. It's more accurately seen as an anticipatory way of trying to cope with the fear of expected poor performance and the potential negative judgments that might follow. That's a really important distinction.
It is, and this leads us to the heart of Erdan and Midgley's own research, which uses the framework of achievement goal theory to understand this phenomenon.
Yes, achievement goals. For anyone who's not familiar, can you give us a quick overview of what that theory is all about?
Certainly. Achievement goal theory essentially looks at the different reasons why students are motivated to strive for success. A key distinction is made between task goals, where the primary focus is on developing competence and mastering the material.
Okay, learning for learning's sake.
Right. Versus performance goals, where the main aim is to demonstrate your ability or to hide a perceived lack of ability.
And Erdan and Midgley also incorporate a further breakdown of performance goals in their work, right?
Yes. Elliott and Harakovich in their 1996 work made a significant distinction between performance approach goals, where students are driven by a desire to outperform others.
Wanting to be top of the class.
Exactly. And performance avoid goals, where the primary motivation is to avoid appearing incompetent. It's the difference between wanting to be the best and simply not wanting to be the worst.
And it's not usually a case of having only one type of goal, is it? Students can be motivated by multiple things at once.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not typically an either-or situation. Students might be motivated by a genuine desire to learn and improve while also being aware of their standing relative to their peers. These different motivations can coexist.
Okay, so how do these different goal orientations relate to the likelihood of engaging in self-handicapping?
Well, goal theorists also consider the broader classroom environment, the goal structures that are created by teachers, and the school as a whole.
Ah, right.
A classroom with a strong task-oriented structure will emphasize understanding, effort, and personal improvement, whereas a performance-oriented classroom will place more emphasis on grades, competition, and comparisons between students.
And Erdan and Midgley's research specifically investigated how both a student's personal achievement goals and these classroom goal structures relate to the use of self-handicapping.
Precisely. Their main hypothesis was that performance goals and learning in performance-oriented classroom environments would be positively linked to self-handicapping.
Makes sense.
Conversely, they hypothesized that task goals and learning in task-oriented environments would be negatively linked. The underlying idea is that if students are primarily concerned with appearing competent or avoiding looking incompetent, they are more likely to turn to self-handicapping as a way to manage those perceptions.
And they conducted 4 separate studies over 5 years with students in elementary and middle school. What did their research methods look like?
They primarily use surveys to assess students' personal achievement goals, their perceptions of the prevailing goal structures within their classrooms, and their self-reported use of various self-handicapping strategies.
Okay.
Importantly, their measure of self-handicapping was specifically designed to capture both the actual behavior, like not trying hard, and the underlying self-protective intention behind it.
You mentioned an example question they used earlier.
Yes, an example item would be something like some students purposely don't try hard in school, so that if they don't do well, they can say it's because they didn't try. How true is this for you?
Ah, okay. Very direct.
Yeah, this kind of question directly probes both the behavior and the strategic reason behind it.
So, what were the key patterns that emerged across these 4 studies?
They found some consistent results. For instance, self-handicapping consistently showed a negative relationship with students' grades.
Not surprising, I guess.
No. Also, across most of the studies, girls reported engaging in self-handicapping less frequently than boys.
What about the hypothesized link with task goals? That was expected to show a negative correlation with self-handicapping.
That's where the findings were a bit more complex. In the initial 3 studies, they didn't find a clear and consistent link between students' personal task goals or their perceptions of task-oriented classroom environments and their self-reported self-handicapping.
Hmm.
However, in their 4th and most recent study at the time, they did find significant negative correlations. This suggests that a stronger personal focus on learning and mastery, as well as perceiving the classroom as emphasizing these values, might indeed help to reduce self-handicapping.
So maybe it takes a stronger emphasis on task goals to really make a difference.
Possibly. It's an area where further research could definitely shed more light.
And what about the link with performance goals? That was expected to be a stronger predictor of self-handicapping.
Yes, the research consistently showed a positive relationship between performance goals, particularly students' own endorsement of performance goals, and self-handicapping across all 4 studies.
Okay.
Similarly, perceiving the classroom environment as emphasizing performance goals also tended to be associated with more self-handicapping. But the really illuminating finding came in their latest study when they differentiated between performance approach and performance avoid goals.
What did that specific analysis reveal?
They discovered that performance avoid goals were the strongest and most consistent predictor of self-handicapping, whereas performance approach goals showed a much weaker or even non-existent link.
Wow.
This strongly suggests that self-handicapping in academic settings is primarily driven by a desire to avoid appearing incompetent rather than by a desire to look exceptionally competent.
That really reinforces the idea that the fear of negative judgment is a central driving force behind this behavior.
Exactly. However, they do acknowledge a potential limitation in their measurement approach, which primarily focused on self-handicapping as a way to protect self-esteem.
Right.
They point out that it's still possible that performance approach goals might be linked to other forms of self-handicapping that are more focused on self-enhancement, as suggested by Tice's earlier work, although their research in classroom settings didn't provide strong support for that.
And they also briefly touch on the idea that a student's underlying sense of competence might actually influence their adoption of different achievement goals.
Yes. Ellie proposed that a student's perceived competence might precede their goal orientation,
Okay.
with those who feel highly competent being more likely to adopt performance approach goals to showcase their abilities, and those with lower perceived competence being more inclined towards performance avoid goals to protect themselves from appearing incompetent.
Makes sense.
While Erden and Midgley remain somewhat cautious about the idea of approach motives driving self-handicapping in typical classroom settings, they agree that this interplay between perceived competence and goal orientation is an important avenue for future research.
So, based on their comprehensive work, the key takeaway seems to be that academic self-handicapping in the classroom is primarily fueled by a desire to avoid looking bad in front of others.
That's the main conclusion drawn from their extensive research. Now, their paper also looks ahead to identify important directions for future research in this field.
Right, future research. What are some of the key questions they believe still need to be addressed?
One significant area they highlight is the need to better understand individual differences in who is more likely to engage in self-handicapping.
Uh-huh.
Their research hinted at potential differences related to ethnicity, gender, and age. For instance, they observed that performance goals seem to be a stronger predictor of self-handicapping for African American students, and that GPA was a stronger negative predictor for girls. Other research has suggested that self-handicapping might become more prevalent as students get older, and that boys tend to report more of it than girls.
So there might be different underlying factors at play for different groups of students.
Absolutely. They emphasize the importance of exploring why these relationships might vary depending on a student's background and developmental stage. For example, cultural values around competition or the increased salience of negative stereotypes in certain contexts could potentially play a role.
And they also underscore the need for more longitudinal studies that follow students over time.
Yes, the majority of research on self-handicapping provides a snapshot at a single point in time. Longitudinal studies could provide valuable insights into how self-handicapping behaviors develop, whether they change over time, and how different life transitions or changes in educational environments, such as moving from elementary to middle school, might influence these patterns.
That makes perfect sense. Tracking students over a longer period would offer a much richer understanding of the dynamics involved. What about the learning environment itself? They touched on that earlier in relation to goal structures.
They see this as a particularly critical area for future investigation. While their research indicated that learning environments that emphasize performance and highlight differences in ability can contribute to increased self-handicapping,
Right.
they believe we need to identify the specific features of the learning environment that are most influential. For example, what specific teaching practices or school-wide policies might inadvertently encourage self-handicapping?
Yeah.
And conversely, how can we design learning environments that actively discourage it and promote more adaptive achievement strategies?
And it sounds like the role of task goal structures in preventing self-handicapping still needs more exploration.
Exactly. While the link between performance goals and self-handicapping seems relatively robust, the relationship with task goals is less consistently clear. More research is needed to fully understand how fostering a classroom climate that emphasizes learning, effort, and mastery can potentially counteract self-handicapping tendencies.
They also suggest looking more closely at the approach and avoidance dimensions of classroom goal structures themselves.
Yes, just as with individual achievement goals, the messages students receive about performance in the classroom can be interpreted in different ways as opportunities to achieve and demonstrate competence, or as threats of being exposed as incompetent.
Ah.
Understanding which types of messages are more likely to trigger self-handicapping, particularly the kind aimed at protecting self-esteem, is an important avenue for future research.
Beyond the school setting, what other contexts might play a role in influencing self-handicapping behaviors?
They point to the home environment and peer groups as potentially significant influences, particularly during adolescence. Parental responses to children's successes and failures, as well as the messages they convey about the purpose of achievement, could certainly play a role. And during adolescence, with the increased importance of peer approval and social comparison, students might be more likely to engage in self-handicapping when they're being evaluated by their friends.
That resonates. You can imagine a teenager being more worried about looking like a tryhard to their friends than to their teachers in some situations.
Precisely. So, broadening the scope of research to include these other important social contexts is crucial for a more comprehensive understanding of self-handicapping.
Finally, they discuss the methodologies used to study self-handicapping. It seems like most of the research has relied on questionnaires and self-report measures so far.
That's correct. They advocate for the use of a wider array of research methods in the future, including direct classroom observations, in-depth interviews with students, and even potentially experimental designs conducted in natural classroom settings. Employing these diverse methods could help researchers gain a more nuanced and comprehensive understanding of the actual behaviors involved and the underlying thought processes driving them.
Especially since some self-handicapping behaviors might occur outside of the classroom or might be difficult to observe directly, like, not studying at home.
Exactly. And sometimes what might appear to be self-handicapping on the surface could actually be due to other factors, such as, I don't know, boredom or poor organizational skills. Therefore, combining different research approaches could help to tease out these nuances and provide a more accurate picture of the phenomenon.
This has been a truly enlightening deep dive into the complexities of academic self-handicapping and the significant contributions of Erden and Midgley's research. So, what's the main message you'd want our listeners to take away from this discussion?
Well, I think the key thing to remember is that academic self-handicapping, while seemingly counterproductive, is often a strategy rooted in a powerful desire to protect oneself from negative judgments about one's ability. And while it might offer a temporary sense of psychological safety, it ultimately hinders academic performance and can contribute to a negative cycle of underachievement.
And it sounds like understanding the influence of the educational environment is absolutely critical in addressing this issue.
It is. Recognizing how classroom and school-wide factors can unintentionally encourage these behaviors is the first step towards fostering more supportive and growth-oriented learning environments that promote genuine engagement and a belief in one's potential for development.
So here's a final thought for you, for our listeners to consider. Think back to your own experiences in academic settings or even in other areas of your life. Can you identify any situations or subtle messages that might have inadvertently encouraged self-handicapping behaviors in yourself or in others? What were the unspoken cues that might have suggested it was better to not try too hard?
That's a really insightful question to reflect on. Continued research into self-handicapping holds the key to developing more effective strategies for promoting genuine learning, fostering a growth mindset, and ultimately helping individuals break free from the self-defeating cycle of self-sabotage.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration into the fascinating world around us. Until then, keep thinking.